everyone, it's Elizabeth from Fern Creek Stickers, and I'm here today with another different kind of video. I'm trying out some different things. Today I'm going to share my birth story. And so not planning related, not sticker related, but I always have enjoyed hearing people's birth stories, like even way before I was pregnant, was thinking about having kids. I just think it's really interesting to hear. And so I thought I would share my story with giving birth to Daniel. So the short version of this is my birth was nothing like I expected or planned, but I was still like very satisfied and felt like it was a really positive experience. I guess to start with what I had anticipated or planned, I knew enough to not have too high of expectations and to know to hold any plans or expectations loosely, because so much can go wrong, so much can happen that's not anticipated. You know, and even if things don't go wrong, there's just so much that's out of your control, which is definitely what happened in my story. So my intention was that I was going to have an unmedicated birth and I would labor at home for as long as possible. And a big part of that is the hospital I was delivering at is pretty conservative in terms of their policies and the way they do things. So it's like they don't have any wireless fetal monitoring, they don't have any tubs, so pretty much you have to be like in bed or right next to the bed to labor. So there's not a lot of options, you can't move around a lot, so I really wanted to labor at home for as long as possible so I could do things like get in the bath, walk around, I had a TENS unit that I borrowed from my sister, so be able to use some of those resources for unmedicated pain management at home. So that was my plan, labor at home as long as possible, go to the hospital as close to the last minute as I could, and give birth unmedicated there. That is not what happened. So first of all, I was induced at 41 weeks, and going back, I didn't want to be induced, obviously, because my plan was to labor at home as much as I could. And I had talked to my doctor, you know, maybe around 36 weeks, I'd said, you know what, how long will you let me go? Because I was 35, and so that the bottom threshold for being advanced maternal age, I had a friend who was pregnant due a few weeks before me who was also 35, and her doctor said, 40 weeks, we are inducing you. You cannot go a day over your due date. And so I didn't know what my doctor would do. And he said they would let me go a few days past my due date, but they wouldn't let me get all the way to 41 weeks. It was 40 weeks and I was still pregnant, and so I was at the doctor, and what I should say, actually, at my 39-week appointment, I saw a different doctor than I'd seen most of the time. I went to a big OB practice and I saw the same doctor for almost all my appointments, but I saw a different doctor for my last few appointments because of scheduling issues. And so the other doctor was like, he was essentially like, why are you still pregnant? And if you've had a baby recently, you're probably familiar that in the US, the current recommendation really is to induce at 39 weeks. And the rationale for that is essentially 39 weeks is when you have the best outcomes. You have the lowest risk of meconium aspiration, of shoulder dystocia, so a lot of issues that could happen in birth. 39 weeks is kind of when you have the lowest risk of all those things. And there's a big study done looking at whether C-section rates increase with the 39-week induction. So most doctors and a lot of people, they say, induce me at 39 weeks, that's great. So the doctor I saw at my 39-week appointment was like, why are you not already giving birth? Why are you still pregnant? You should have already been induced. But he also said, like, if you want to go another week, that's fine. Come in next week and we'll get an induction scheduled at that point. And I was also too, starting at 36 weeks, I was getting a non-stress test every week because I was 35. That's pretty standard practice. So I would go in and have the fetal monitor hooked up to me for half an hour and just monitor the baby's heart rate and also whether I was having any contractions. So just to make sure that the baby wasn't in distress and everything was going well. So I was having these non-stress tests that showed that everything was fine. He was doing fine in there. So there wasn't like a concern that things were a problem, and everything, my blood pressure was great. There wasn't any concern about preeclampsia or anything else. At my 40-week appointment, they're like, okay, you made it to 40 weeks. We need to get this induction scheduled. But due to scheduling issues, they couldn't get it scheduled until I was 40 weeks, 6 days. December 7th was when the induction ended up being scheduled for. So the doctor was like, I really don't want it to go this long, but they couldn't schedule it earlier. The good thing was, though, I was able to get the induction scheduled with the doctor that I had seen for most of my pregnancy. So he was the one who ended up delivering my baby, which was great. So anyway, so they scheduled one more non-stress test between the 40-week appointment and my induction. So I went in one more time just to make sure everything was okay, which it was. So I was scheduled to go in at 6 p.m. on December 7th, which was when I was 40 weeks, 6 days. And though they called me that day and they were like, we're super busy, lots of people had babies, come in at 6 a.m. tomorrow instead. So we thought we were gonna go in at 6 a.m. on the 8th. And then they called again and they said, never mind, we noticed how pregnant you are. You really need to come in and have this baby. So still come at 6 p.m. So we went to the hospital at 6, and we did have to wait a while because there were a lot of babies being born, so we had to wait a while to get a room. So it was about 9, I think, by the time that we actually got to the room and got moving with things. And that was probably a good thing because Brian went out and got us some dinner, and it was a while before I got to eat again. So the induction started about 10, and they used a Foley balloon. And so a Foley balloon is inserted into your cervix and is essentially a balloon. Sorry, Daniel's napping. I keep checking the baby monitor to make sure he's still asleep. So they insert this balloon filled with saline into your cervix that essentially manually expands your cervix and gets labor started. So the plan was to do that overnight and then start Pitocin in the morning, which Pitocin starts contractions going. And I should say at this point too, at my appointments, I was not dilated at all. Like one of the appointments, they were like, maybe you're like half a centimeter dilated, but like labor had not moved anywhere. Daniel had not dropped. There was no dilation, like nothing was suggesting that labor had gone anywhere. So like nothing had started by the time I got induced. So for me, the Foley balloon was really painful, and that pain lasted the whole time. And that was worse than contractions because it was constant. The contractions came and went. So the Foley balloon, it didn't start hurting at first. The first couple hours were okay, but after that, it really started to hurt, and it was just a constant pain. And it especially started to hurt on my left side and made my walking really painful. So like when I had to get up and go to the bathroom, I needed to like lean on Brian and kind of drag my left leg along. So I'm not quite sure what happened, what it was about it, but the Foley balloon was really painful for me, and that just kind of stayed the whole time, that pain. So I had a hard time sleeping that night, and because laying down really hurt, standing up actually felt the best, standing up in one position. And that's one of those, if I could go back in time, the weird thing that I wish I'd brought to the hospital was I wish that I'd brought one of those like mats that you put in the kitchen that helps relieve pain when you're standing, because the floors in the hospital were super hard, and somebody had told me that your feet might swell up more after you give birth, so bring shoes with to the hospital that are like comfortable and can expand. So I'd worn some like stretchy flats that have no support at all, and I ended up standing for a lot of the time. And so I wish I'd had better shoes and one of those mats to stand on that would have made my legs feel better, because my legs were really kind of worn out from just standing there and just kind of gently swaying back and forth. Eventually Brian was able to help me get into bed and get comfortable, and I slept on and off for a few hours, but it was definitely not a great night of sleep. And at 6 they came in and they started Pitocin, so that got things moving along. Contractions weren't too bad at first, and really maybe the first couple hours on Pitocin, I didn't feel contractions at all. And the contractions really weren't bad at all until early afternoon. They were very manageable. Then, so the Pitocin started about 6. The doctor came in about 10 and broke my water. And that was kind of a weird experience, especially because at that point, I still really wasn't feeling the contractions. But then I knew when I was having contractions because I would feel more water come out when I would have contractions. So I was like, oh, that was a contraction. But I still wasn't feeling them very strongly at that point. And the actual getting my water broken, that was painful too, because I think anytime they did cervical check, like during those last appointments, that is just not a fun time. It's just not, your cervix is not an easy place to get to. So getting my water broke hurt, but fortunately that was a pretty temporary thing. Yeah, so through the morning wasn't bad at all. Early afternoon, the contractions started to get real. The nurse I had at that point, she moved me into a rocking chair, and so that was helpful to kind of rock through some of the contractions and be able to deal with it that way. I had prepared a lot by doing breathing exercises and sort of mindfulness meditations to prepare for labor. So I was also doing some of those things and working on breathing through the contractions and trying to use visualizations and meditation to help kind of take me out of the moment and take me out of the pain. I also had the experience that I heard people talk about but did not believe could happen, of falling asleep in between contractions, which is so weird because it's not that much time, but I definitely would doze off and then feel the pain again and wake up again. And that is just a weird experience to have, to keep falling asleep for such a short period of time between such intense pain. So anyway, at this point I had several cervical checks along the way and I was slowly dilating, and I think it was about 3 o'clock I was at 6 centimeters. So I was making good progress at that point. But that is where I stalled. I never got beyond 6 centimeters. The pain was starting to get pretty intense. I really wanted to avoid an epidural, and a lot of that is, you know, no judgment for whatever people do. And I ended up getting an epidural, so definitely no judgment. A lot of it was I wanted to experience giving birth, and this is an experience that women have been having for, but it was getting to the point, the pain was pretty painful. You know, I'd really been feeling a lot of pain since shortly after the Foley balloon was inserted, and I still had some of that ongoing pain in between contractions from the Foley balloon. So I said, next time they check me, if I'm still at 6 centimeters, I think it's time to get the epidural. So about 6 o'clock, the doctor came back, checked me again, still at 6 centimeters, and I said, okay, it is time for the epidural. So I got an epidural, and, you know, like people say, it's amazing. It just takes away the pain, but it is weird because you don't feel your legs, and so you're in this weird position where you just can't feel anything. Also, the good thing, once I got the epidural, I was really able to sleep, and I was tired at that point, so it was good to be able to actually like get some real sleep, get some real rest. And somewhere around there was also Brian left for a little bit to go home, take a shower, get some dinner, because it did not seem like things were going anywhere anytime soon. So a couple hours later, the doctor came back and checked again, and I was still at 6 centimeters. And that's when he said, if you don't get much further, or if you don't start to progress soon, we're gonna have to start talking about a C-section. And, you know, and I said, you know, that's not ideal, but I understand if we're not getting anywhere, this is a C-section is what's going to have to happen. And especially because the concern was at that point Daniel still hadn't dropped. He was still high, and we needed the pressure of his head to help dilate me the rest of the way. So the nurse we had for that last shift was amazing, and so she spent those last few hours really working hard to get me in different positions, to do everything we could to get Daniel to drop and help me dilate the rest of the way. And she kept saying, you know, I want you to feel like if you end up getting a C-section, that you did everything possible to prevent that and to have a vaginal delivery. And I really felt like she worked really hard to get me in different positions, to try everything we could do to get Daniel to drop and to avoid a C-section if possible. But the problem was at that point, any position she would get me into that was most advantageous for helping him to descend was affecting his heart rate, and his heart rate was dropping when they moved me into those positions. So that was really where it was like, okay, this is probably leading to a C-section. And about 11 o'clock, the doctor came back. I was still 6 centimeters, and he said, you know, at this point, it's really time for a C-section. And I said, yeah, that's fine. Again, not what I had planned on, but Daniel was going nowhere. And once we had the C-section, we found out why he was going nowhere. He was not moving. I was not dilating. A C-section seemed like really the way to go. And at the end of the day, healthy mom and healthy baby was the most important thing to me. And that's what we ended up with. So they started prepping me for the C-section. The thing that was kind of funny, they had 2 liquid oral medications that I needed to take, and I threw those both up. And I had not thrown up at all my whole pregnancy, and I threw up like in the last hour of pregnancy. I threw up those medications. So that was, you know, fun times. And also too, then they're like changing my gown and changing everything right before I went into the C-section. So they started prepping me about 11, and things moved pretty fast because he was born December 8th. So he was born right before midnight on December 8th. And again, it was the doctor I'd seen most of my pregnancy was the one who delivered the baby. And actually the doctor I'd seen the last few appointments assisted with the C-section. So people I'd seen a lot during my pregnancy were able to deliver him. And so the C-section was uneventful. Brian is a fainter, so he was sitting down, turned away from everything that was happening. He was not going to watch Daniel come out. He was not going to see what happened, which was totally fine. And I knew in advance that once things started to happen, Brian was not going to be watching because we did not need him passing out. So yeah, so Daniel was born, and the nurses took Brian's phone so they could take some pictures, which was great. And, you know, and we didn't know if we were having a boy or a girl, so it was a big surprise to find out that we were having a boy. And he was born, and he was great, and everything was healthy. You know, and hearing him, it was like him crying was delayed by it probably wasn't long at all, but I was just waiting to hear that cry. It was, you know, again, probably it was 15 seconds before he cried, but I was waiting to hear that happen. But the thing that was funny, when they pulled him out, the doctors said, like, oh my goodness, that is a big baby. And so when they said that, I was thinking they meant like he was like 10 pounds. It turned out he was 8 pounds 3 ounces. So still a big baby, but not like a gigantic baby. But here's the thing, his head was 99th percentile. He had a gigantic head, and that's why he was not descending. He was stuck because of his big old head. And the doctor said too that it was probably a good thing in the end. Even if he had descended, it would have been a rough vaginal delivery, and there probably would have been a lot of tearing. So it was probably for the best that I ended up with a C-section. So he and his big head came out by C-section. So they took us to the recovery area, and I was able to hold him. But I had to spend an hour in recovery while they monitored me after the C-section, but I was able to hold Daniel. The thing was though, I was so exhausted at that point, so I was nodding off during that hour that I was holding him and doing skin to skin with him. So it was great to hold him and to meet him, but I was just exhausted at that point. But anyway, so he was born and he was healthy and I was healthy, and fortunately had a really easy recovery from the C-section. And Daniel's name we chose, so Daniel we chose partly because we just wanted kind of a timeless classic name, so a name that's not going to seem like trendy when he's 50 years old. So we felt like Daniel was a good name that's very timeless, and we also liked it as a biblical name, that Daniel is a biblical character who has a very strong faith and stands up for his faith. And his middle name is Ross, which is Brian's grandpa's middle name, and Brian's grandfather was very important to him and really nurtured him and took a special interest in him. And unfortunately, I was never able to meet his grandfather, but I've heard such good stories about him. And his first name was Donald, and we felt like Donald is just a name that our last president has kind of, there's a lot of associations with the name, so we didn't want Donald as a middle name, so we went with Ross, which was his grandfather's middle name. And also Ross is cool because it's a variation of Roos, which is Brian's family's like Swedish ancestral family name. And there are a lot of family members that have Roos as their middle name, but Ross was a variation of that, and we liked Ross better than Roos. So so it has this connection to Brian's family more broadly, and also a connection to his grandfather, which we really liked. So Daniel Ross Larson was born on December 8th, 2022, and he was 19.5 inches and 8 pounds 3 ounces, and he's now 6 months old. It's definitely been an adjustment over the last 6 months, but I can't imagine life without him, and he has brought so much joy into our lives, and we are so grateful and so blessed to have him as a part of our family. So I hope that you enjoyed hearing my birth story. It was fun to share it, and fun for me to finally get this down while things are still fresh in my memory and I can remember it in the future. So I hope that you are all doing well, and I'll see you again soon. Bye everyone.